Let's put some context to what is going to happen. The Roman Empire was divided by Theodosius into two. The western one, led by Honorius and advised by Stilicho, and the eastern one, led by Arcadius. The Western Empire is supported by barbarian auxiliary troops like Alaric's Goths, who constantly blackmail the emperor. The Roman legions are actually a shadow of what they once were, and they are not capable of defending all the empire's borders on their own. In addition, the emperor's power is waning. Well, it has been for some time, and small local lords are beginning to appear who are paying less and less attention to Ravenna, the new capital of the empire. It is no longer Rome. The borders with Germania are poorly defended, as most of the troops have been withdrawn to protect Italy from the Gothic leaders Alaric and Radagaisus, so it's a good time to attack those positions. And it is that on the 31st of December of the year 406 after Christ. The Rhine froze at the height of Mainz, allowing anyone to cross it on foot. And it is that a barbarian confederation composed of Suevi, Vandals, Alans, Burgundians, Sarmatians, Gepids, and Pannonians crossed the Rhine, ending the defenders and beginning the devastation of Gaul. Such was the amount of barbarians that the prefect of Gaul withdrew with his troops without resistance, selling the cities of Mainz, Strasbourg, and Trier among the main ones. The leaders of the confederation were the kings Respendiel and Gonderic. The barbarians had really been forced to migrate across the Rhine due to the pressure the Huns were exerting on their positions, increasingly covering more territory. St. Jerome narrates that, one quote literally, everything that is between the Alps and the Pyrenees, what is between the ocean and the Rhine, has been devastated. The Hispanias tremble every day at the imminent danger, remembering the invasion of the Cimbri centuries ago. But misfortunes never come alone. In Britannia, a Roman general rose up in arms against the emperor and proclaimed himself Emperor Constantine III. He crossed into Gaul under the pretext of confronting the barbarian invasion, but in reality he probably made a pact with them as there was no battle. Constantine marched straight to the capital of Gaul, Arles. He also won in battle the army sent by Honorius and managed to take the city, knowing that he would not be attacked by the barbarians and that Honorius was busy in Italy with Alaric. He sent his son Constant and his best general Gerontius to take Hispania, the homeland of Honorius's father, that is Theodosius. In the year 409 in Hispania, the Romans raised an army of peasants and slaves with the intention of defending the territory. Well, when one say Romans, one means those loyal to the true emperor, to Honorius. Because after all, they are all Romans. This army concentrated in Lusitania, and despite everything, they managed to defeat Geroncio's army, which is surprising as this was an army with military experience. Geroncio retreated to the Pyrenees, where Constantine III sent him reinforcements. And now, those loyal to the true emperor were crushed by Geroncio and their leaders captured. Constant, the son of Constantine, left with the prisoners to see his father, while Geroncio stayed in Hispania, establishing the operations center in Zaragoza. Then Geroncio began to legislate in Hispania as if it were his own, allowing the looting of large tracts of fields and numerous villas, which was not well seen by Constantine III, as he wanted Hispania to be loyal, not resentful once it was his. And that's why he ordered Geroncio to relinquish command and return with him. But things did not go that way. Geroncio refused and decided to appoint an Augustus himself Maximus, one of his loyal generals. But of course, Geroncio knew that he needed a much larger army if he wanted to keep Hispania against Constantine III and Honorius. So he made a decision that would change the future of Hispania forever. He hired the Suevi, Vandals, and Alans as mercenaries. So he allowed them to enter Hispania without being attacked. Now these mercenaries wanted to get paid and a roof to sleep under, but of course, uncontrolled immigration is impossible to sustain by any land. So the first problems appeared. Gerontius decided to significantly increase taxes to be able to pay and maintain these mercenaries. But not being enough, he allowed them to loot the fields, which obviously generated tension in Hispania. So we have an emperor in Ravenna named Honorius who only controls Italy, who also has to face again the Goths of Alaric. We have Constantine III as emperor in Arles, controlling Gaul and Britain. Finally, we have Maximus and Gerontius controlling Hispania, in command of a mix of Romans and Suevi, Vandals and Alans. Constantine sent an army led by Justus to Hispania to regain control, but it was defeated. The following year, in 410 AD, while Constantine was leading a campaign against Honorius in Italy, Gerontius crossed the Pyrenees and invaded Gaul. He marched towards Vienne, where Caesar Constant was, with the intention of cutting off Constantine's supply lines in Italy. He took the city and executed Constant, which prevented Constantine III, who was returning from Italy after being defeated, from obtaining supplies and feeding his army. The supposed emperor then found himself trapped between Italy and the troops of Gerontius. The latter set out to besiege the capital of Gaul, and so he did, with the intention of dominating the entire region. However, in the summer of the year 400 after Christ, Honorius sent an army to hunt down the two rebels. In a swift move, he defeated Gerontius and the remnants of Constantine III, virtually restoring control of his empire. Gerontius committed suicide while Constantine was executed. Maximus fell into practical irrelevance, forced to live among the barbarians, and these barbarians had already made it clear that they would stay permanently in Hispania. Let's take a look at some numbers. It is estimated that there would be about 200,000 barbarians, of which only 56,000 would be warriors. It's not a small number, but keep in mind that the Hispanic population was between 5 and 6 million. Regardless, despite the difference in numbers, power and institutions were in barbarian hands. Latin authors narrate the occupation of Hispania with an apocalyptic point of view, saying that they burned all the cities, devastated the fields, and killed everyone. It's possible that it was like this at first, but when they made it clear that they were going to stay, their behavior probably changed and became more peaceful and friendly with the people. The barbarians decided to divide Hispania through a lottery to avoid problems, which is not something foreign to the Germanic tradition. Let's see how things turned out. The Suevi stayed in the most western Galatia, with important cities like Lugo or Braga. The Siling Vandals, who were more or less half of the Vandals, stayed with part of Baetica, with cities like Cordoba and Seville. The other part of the Vandals, the Asding, stayed with a small land to the north of present-day Castile and Leon, while the Alans stayed with Lusitania and Carthaginensis, with important cities like Toledo, Merida, Salamanca, and Cartagena. Finally, it seems that the Cantabrians were allowed to live independently, along with the Basques to the north of the peninsula. The distribution was made without taking into account Emperor Honorius, so officially it had no value, but in practice no one could stand up to it. However, Tarraconense continued to remain under the direct control of the Roman Empire. Each village was led by a king, although they did not yet have the powers of a king as such, but were the most powerful lords of each village. However, one will refer to them as kings. We have King Adax, leading the Alans, Hermerico, the Suevi, Fredbul, the Siling Vandals, and finally Gunderico, the Asting Vandals. The Hispanic natives, who had something to say, preferred to live under barbarian rule rather than flee to Tarraconensis to continue living under Roman rule. The decline of the empire was already visible, and little by little everyone was jumping ship. The Latin author Orosius mentions that the citizens preferred to endure freedom with poverty among the barbarians than worry with tributes among the Romans. The problem with the distribution was that it was not proportional to the population number of each, let's say, faction, culture, or tribe as you prefer to call it, as well as to their military power, which would surely lead to a confrontation in the future, however. Soon, the distribution in Hispania would change because a new barbarian people longed to establish their Germanic kingdom and were looking for a territory in which to achieve it, a people who would arrive and turn upside down the mirage of peace that existed in Hispania. These people were the Visigothic people. We are going to go back to the year 382 after Christ, the year in which Theodosius made a pact with the Visigoths that they would become foederati, that is, friendly peoples of Rome, seeking their assimilation within the empire in exchange for these troops to defend the Roman borders. But this pact was broken by the Romans because, among other things, they did not supply the Visigoths with supplies, so tensions increased over the years. However, what sparked hostilities again was the death of Theodosius in Milan in the year 395, which nullified the pact. The empire, as we all know, then split into east and west with two young and inexperienced emperors, which led the Visigoths to feel extremely strong. Added to this, we have the Huns pressing from the east, so it was time to act. They appointed the noble Alaric of the Balt lineage as leader, and here begins his story. Alaric ordered a great migration, and they set off for the heart of the Eastern Empire, to Constantinople. However, let's not get confused. Alaric sought to create a Gothic kingdom within the boundaries of the empire and to be considered allies or friends of Rome, as well as to achieve a high position in the Roman hierarchy. That is, he was not looking to loot and destroy, he was looking to make a pact. They arrived in Constantinople, and at its gates, Alaric negotiated a deal, but it seems they achieved nothing as the Visigoths left and invaded Greece, now indeed devastating mythical cities like Corinth and Sparta. Athens was saved because, according to legend, Athena and Achilles appeared to him in a dream and told him that if he attacked the city, the gods themselves would defend it. It seems that this invasion intimidated Arcadius, the Eastern Emperor, as in the year 397 he appointed Alaric as Magister Militum in the prefecture of Illyricum. This pact seems to respond to Arcadius's intention to keep any possible attack from Honorius seeking to annex Illyria to the west at bay. However, this pact was broken a few years later. It's not very clear why. Alaric then decided to seek the same thing but in the Western Empire. In 402, he headed to Milan, the Western Roman Empire's capital, with his entire populace. It is unclear whether to negotiate or seize the city. But he could not get there, as Stilicho, a trusted man of Honorius, defeated the Visigoths in the Battle of Pollentia, where he ended up with a significant part of the Goths. He also took a large part of the Visigothic treasure. Alaric retreated to Dalmatia, but along the way, near Verona, he was intercepted by the Romans and suffered a new defeat, which forced the Visigoths to put aside hostilities for the moment, interestingly given how close Alaric had been to reaching Milan. The Romans moved the capital to Ravenna, which was more easily defensible. In the year 405 after Christ, Radagaisus, leader of the Ostrogoths, invaded the Italian peninsula. However, by the middle of the following year, in the year 406, this invasion was defeated and many of his men enlisted in the Roman legions. But what also happened this year? Well, on December 31st, the invasion of the Rhine took place. That is, a horde of barbarians crossed the Rhine and occupied Gaul. But in addition, in the year 407, a Roman general declared himself emperor in Britain, which led to another civil war. And do you know what's good? That you can learn all this by clicking on the link shown on the screen. 1T will take you to the video where one discussed all this, as well as the arrival of the barbarians in Hispania. And as always, one take this opportunity to ask you that, if you like what you're seeing, support the channel by subscribing and giving it a like. At the Hispanic Guard, we welcome you with open arms. And why not? Come to the community's Discord to participate in the day-to-day of the Guard. In the description, you have all the channel links. Let's continue. Honorio tried to hire the Visigoths as mercenaries so that they would not cause damage to his lands, but Alarico demanded an amount of money too high for the Roman coffers. He asked for 4,000 pounds of gold. Obviously, Honorio, with empty coffers, rejected the proposal. This angered the Visigoths. Alarico set course for Italy, not to take the capital of the empire, Ravenna. No, he went straight to take the Eternal City, Rome, which was a symbolic city of the power of the legions. Along the way, he devoted himself to devastating cities and fortified posts without any opposition from the imperial forces. And in the fall of the year 408, the Visigothic forces arrived at the gates of Rome, but there they also received reinforcements. But reinforcements from whom? If it is assumed that the entire Visigothic people were already there. Well, the reinforcements consisted of 12,000 Ostrogothic warriors who had enlisted in the Roman army after the defeat of Radagaiso years ago. But it doesn't end there. To these reinforcements were added more barbarians who had been disappointed with the new anti-barbarian policy of the emperor, reaching a total of 30,000 additional men. And there's still more. Slaves from all over Italy arrived at his hosts, and just in case, Alaric called his brother-in-law, Ataulf, who was in command of an army in Pannonia, to help him in Italy. Alaric completely surrounded the city and patiently waited for the emperor, or whoever, to pay him a decent amount of money. Honorius turned a deaf ear and sent neither an army nor a ransom. So it was the citizens of Rome themselves who paid their own ransom. They gave away exquisite clothes, statues, and pounds of gold and silver. With this, the Visigoths were satisfied. They lifted the siege and moved a few kilometers away. That is, they lifted the siege but stayed near Rome. The following year, in 409 Anno Domini, Ataulfo finally arrived in Italy with his army, which was mostly made up of cavalry and Grutungos, another Gothic people. This army merged with Alaric's, which brought the relationship with Honorius to unsustainable levels of tension. Alaric contacted the emperor to offer him the same as always: peace in exchange for allowing him to create a Gothic kingdom within the Roman borders. 1T is worth noting that even Pope I Nanocent I participated in the discussions. However, Honorius said no and the war resumed. Alaric was again besieging the city of Rome, trying to surrender it by hunger, as he did not have the ability to take the walls by force. Seeing that Honorius still wouldn't budge, he took a Roman noble favorable to the Visigoths, Attalus, and forced the Senate to name him Western Roman Emperor. However, it did him little good because even though he legislated in favor of the Visigoths, the laws simply were not applied. Finally, Alaric deposed him. In the year 410 after Christ, the gates of the Eternal City opened and the Visigoths entered, but it should be noted that Alaric gave strict orders not to burn anything, not to enter the sacred buildings, and to avoid bloodshed if it was not necessary. The looting lasted 3 days, and the Visigoths managed to get a considerable booty, in addition to showing the world that if they wanted, they could take even the city that had conquered so many territories. On the other hand, they had managed to take Galla Placidia, daughter of Theodosius and sister of the emperors Honorius and Arcadius, prisoner. Obviously, Alaric intended to use this woman as a good bargaining chip with the emperors. Okay, let's see how the Visigoths are now. They have around 100,000 people, according to some authors, and of course, they need to be fed. In fact, it has reached a point where the Visigoths would prefer to be given food rather than gold. Look, it's not that they're going hungry, but their reserves are running out, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be replenished in the short term, so the leader made the decision to head south. On one hand, he would be taking various towns and cities in his path, but in reality, his goal was not in Italy. His intention was to embark his people and cross to the north of Africa, which served as a granary for Rome, and there establish his longed-for Gothic kingdom. It seemed they would achieve it. They embarked on the fleet, but a strong storm decimated their people, so they had to return to the Italian peninsula. Despite this, Alaric was determined to try again when the weather improved. However, at the end of the year 410 after Christ and at 40 years of age, Alaric died of natural causes. In short, he was not betrayed and did not die in battle. What do they do now with Alaric's body? Well, the whole town heads to the Busento River, and after hard work they manage to divert its course, exposing an area of the river now without water. Here they ordered some slaves to dig a grave right in the middle, and there they buried Alaric along with a large amount of wealth. After this, they covered the grave and redirected the river back to its usual course, dismantling the works they had previously done, and so that the tomb of the Visigothic king would remain anonymous. The Visigoths killed the prisoners, so that no one would betray the location of the point where Alaric would rest for all eternity. The Visigoths now needed a new king, and something they had been looking for many years. A territory within the borders of the Roman Empire where they could settle and establish their own Visigothic kingdom. Ataulf, Alaric's brother-in-law, was chosen king of the Visigoths. He decided not to continue betting on Alaric's plan to cross to North Africa, but would look for these lands elsewhere in the empire. Alaric had died in southern Italy after trying to reach North Africa with his people. The Visigoths needed a new king, and Ataulf, Alaric's brother-in-law, was chosen to succeed him. The new king, described as very handsome and intelligent, also of devout lineage, decided that he would not follow Alaric's plan to invade Africa. Instead, he headed north to Italy to seek other territories in the old continent. His passage through Italy was truly destructive, looting everything in his path and destroying what they could not take. It might seem that Ataulfo saw that a crown agreement was impossible, hence he let himself be carried away by anger. At the same time, he decided to support a new claimant to the throne, named Jovinus, who was in Gaul and was supported by the Gallo-Roman aristocracy and various barbarian peoples. However, this support did not last long, for the same reasons that the support for the previous usurper ended. No matter how much they legislated in his favor, nothing changed. So Ataulfo decided to now support Honorio and fight for him on the battlefield. Ataulfo's first battle in defense of Honorio was in the year 412, when he defeated the god Saro, arch-enemy of his people. Thanks to this battle, Ataulfo achieved a high position within the imperial military structure. But it doesn't end there. The Visigoths continued fighting for Honorio, and in 413 he faced Jovino and his loyalists in open field, and he defeated them, putting them at the feet of the true emperor of Rome. Jovino, as well as his brother, was executed for treason, and it is then when another strong man appears in the west, initially loyal to Honorio. His name is Constancio. It was he who decided that the Visigoths should settle in the area of Burdigalia, now Bordeaux, in the province of Aquitaine. It might seem that they finally get along with Rome, but nothing could be further from the truth. That the empire broke its part of the pact to send supplies to the Visigoth people to keep them fed. It's not that they wanted to fulfill the pact from Ravenna. The thing is that another usurper had arisen, this time in Africa, the granary of the Western Roman Empire. Notice that in 7 years we've had 5 usurpers. Poor Honorius spent his reign crushing usurpers. But the Visigoths didn't care about any of this. They wanted their grain, and if they didn't get it, they planned to obtain it. Ataulf set his army in motion and besieged the city of Marseille, but the assault failed, so the Visigoths had to return to Burdigalia to lick their wounds. Ataulf, in the year 414, desperate to see that he was not achieving his goals, decided to reappoint Attalus as emperor, who remember was the first usurper that the Visigoths had supported under the command of Alaric. But to try to put even more pressure on Honorius, Ataulf married Galla Placidia, who remember was the sister of Honorius and Arcadius, the emperors of the West and East respectively. This union was very pleasing to the Gallo-Roman aristocracy, but it did not amuse Emperor Honorius at all, who did not recognize the marriage. Despite the political reasons, it seems that they both had a sentimental relationship, as the chronicler Orosius tells that Placidia wisely advised her husband. The fact is that Honorius was pissed off, and after Constans crushed the rebellion in Africa, he sent him to finish off the Visigoths. Constans first attacked Arles, the capital of the prefecture of the Gauls, with the intention of pressuring the Visigoths of Aquitaine. Ataulf did not want to face the Roman army as he risked being defeated and hunted like an animal, so he began to move south, attacking many cities that resisted his advance. Finally, they arrived at a great natural barrier, the Pyrenees. Ataulf had to decide whether to cross and enter Hispania or stay in Gaul and face the troops of Constance. After deliberating, he made a decision that would radically change the fate of Hispania. From Spain. End of the future Spain. The Visigoths crossed through the passes of the Pyrenees and arrived in Tarraconense, officially under Roman control. Ataulfo headed to the coast, and instead of establishing his base in Tarraco, as many had done before him, he settled in Barcino, present-day Barcelona, so this city would be the first capital of the Gothic court in Hispania. From the union between Ataulfo and Placidia, Theodosius was born, who however died at just 1 year of age. It was at the end of the year 415 AD. Ataulfo himself died. The cause, it is known that he was murdered. The reason, it is speculated that it was some barbarian from his entourage who felt insulted by Ataulfo's closeness to the Roman world. It's as if he was abandoning his Gothic roots. According to Orosio, at first Ataulfo wanted to destroy what he called Romania, that is, the Roman Empire, and establish Gothia, but the thought changed until he decided that he would be the one to save the empire and be remembered for such a feat. Well, the fact is that the Visigoths were again without a king and without a successor, so it was time to choose a new Rex, as they called it. And what happens in these cases? If there is a clear leader, then the thing is simple. But if there isn't, well, then there are bloodbaths. Sigeric, a staunch opponent of the Balting clan, executed the entire family of Ataulf and humiliated Galla Placidia through the streets of the city. However, his, let's say, reign only lasted a week, as the Visigothic nobles themselves executed him. Same situation, huh? Who to choose? Well, as things seem to have gone well under the command of the Martingo clan, that is, Alaric and Ataulf, another member of this house, Wallia, was chosen. This new king was determined to achieve Alaric's dream of reaching Africa and establishing his Gothic kingdom there. They departed from southeast Hispania in their ships, but as if the gods did not want them to reach the African coast, another storm broke out that forced the Visigothic people to return to Hispania and look for an alternative plan. The Visigoths had a huge problem, and that is that they needed food and a place where they could live peacefully. They had neither one nor the other. In fact, in order to eat, they had to buy wheat from the Vandals, who exploited the situation to significantly raise the price. And for the first time, they achieved a pact that seemed to be lasting in the year 416 after Christ. Honorius decided to federate the Visigothic people again and assigned them the province of Tarraconensis, so that they could live and create their much-desired Gothic kingdom. In addition, he would send them a quantity of wheat. The truth is that it was laughable. In exchange, Honorius asked for two things. The first was the return of Galla Placidia, whom he married to Constantius, the strongest Roman general in the west and loyal to the emperor. On the other hand, the Visigoths had been given the mission to restore imperial power in Hispania. That is, they should end the other three barbarian peoples settled in the peninsula, the Suevi, Vandals, and Alans. The barbarian kingdoms divided Hispania among themselves to live in harmony. They would see how their lives would drastically change due to the campaigns of the Visigothic people. The Roman Empire was dying. But with the arrival of the Visigoths in Hispania, the seed of a future kingdom had been planted. Wallia decided to honor his word, and he prepared the warriors of his people for a military campaign that would pit them against the other barbarian peoples who had settled in Hispania. For the first time in a long time, the Visigoths had a territory they could call home and to which they could return when the war ended. If you don't know how the Visigoths came to Spain, you can do so by clicking on the link shown at the top of the screen, where you will learn about the complete reign of Ataulf and the beginning of the reign of Wallia. Let's continue. In the year 416 after Christ, Wallia began his military campaign to restore imperial power in Hispania, and his first target were the Alans. But first, one want to remind you that the king of the Alans was Adax. The Visigoths left Barcino and invaded the neighboring territory. A battle took place there in which Wallia emerged victorious. Despite this, we should not underestimate the Alans, as they were a very famous warrior people, experts in cavalry, and hardened in 1,000 battles. Well, the fact is that the Alans were forced to retreat and cede territory to the Visigoths. It seems that the Alans saw themselves with few chances of winning the war, so they allied with the Siling Vandals, led by King Fredbal. Both peoples joined forces in Baetica and prepared to fight the Visigoths. Wallia advanced like a steamroller and defeated the coalition. Unfortunately, not much is known about these campaigns. How strange, right? Well, we are already used to some passages being very poorly documented on the channel. The fact is that in the year 417 AD, the coalition of Alans and Vandals retreated to the extreme south of Hispania, very close to the Rock of Gibraltar, where the decisive battle of the campaign took place. King Gadax died in combat, while Fredbal was captured, chained, and sent to Ravenna to be placed at the disposal of Honorius, the Western Emperor. The chroniclers of the time, both Idacio and San Isidoro, tell that the slaughter to which the Alans and Silingos were subjected was brutal. So many barbarians died that the survivors forgot their kingdoms and fled hastily to the kingdom of the Asting Vandals, ruled by Gunderic. This king, formerly king of the Asting Vandals, adopted the title of Rex Vandalorum et Alanorum, that is, king of the Vandals and the Alans. After this campaign, the kingdom of the Alans and the Siling Vandals was returned to the Western Roman Empire. Seeing how quickly the Visigothic forces had defeated the Alans and Vandals in the year 418 after Christ, Constans decided that the Visigoths should return from Hispania. Constans, who was the strong man of the west under Honorius, wanted to keep the Visigoths away from the rich lands of Hispania to prevent them from getting the idea of staying there and becoming independent from the empire. The Visigoths were sent to Aquitaine II, where they settled under the regime of Hospitalitas. The Visigoths would have their own lands, in quotes, but in reality they belonged to the empire. Let me explain. The lands of the Visigoths paid a part of their taxes to the empire and the other to the Visigothic king, so the Romans did not receive all the income but had those lands secure, as let's say the title holder was still the empire. Based on this settlement, the Gothic kingdom of Tolosa began to germinate, whose capital, Tolosa, would be the current Toulouse. At last, the Visigoths had their own domains. But Wallia would not see the fruits of his labor, as he died shortly after that same year. The successor to the Visigothic throne was Theodoric I, described as a man of great moderation, strength, and morality. Okay, now we're going to step on the gas a bit and take a more general view of everything. In the year 420 of the marriage between Constans and Galla Placidia, Valentinian was born, the future Emperor Valentinian III. However, Constans could not see his son grow up, as he died a year later. 3 years later, in 423 AD, Emperor Honorius died, which led to a new usurper, John, rising up in arms in Hispania. But this rebel soon died, executed by the imperial forces. 2 years later, in 425, Valentinian III came to the throne, while a brilliant Roman general, Aetius, began to stand out in the military field. But while all this was happening, things were not quiet in Hispania. During the 20s, Gunderic's Vandals attacked the Suevi and were on the verge of crushing them. But the Suevi were saved thanks to the intervention of a Roman army in their support. Gunderic died in the year 428 AD, and his successor, Genseric, decided to revive the old Gothic dream of migrating to Africa. And the following year, in 429, the Vandals left Hispania and established a kingdom in North Africa. As one have said in previous videos, the Western Roman Empire was a ship that was leaking everywhere. And the successive emperors and generals were just patching things up and delaying the inevitable. The fact is that it was time for all the peoples to take advantage of the empire's weakness to gain more power, again the Visigoths. These people, now led by Theodoric I, carried out a series of campaigns during the 30s of the 5th century AD. The Visigothic king began some expansion campaigns that led him to confront the Romans led by Aetius. In the year 430 AD, the Visigoths suffered a defeat near Arles, and it took them 6 years to recover, but they did. One in the year 436, Theodoric I besieged and took Narbonne, but 2 years later he was defeated again by Aetius. The following year, in 439 AD, Theodoric I and Aetius agreed to peace, a beneficial peace for the Visigoths, as they had managed to get the newly conquered territories respected by the emperor. The Suevi, for their part, who, remember that they were the only barbarians left in Hispania, did not stand idly by. In the year 438 after Christ, the Suevi, led by King Requila, launched a campaign against Baetica, managing to defeat the Romans who defended the province. 2 years later, in 440 after Christ, the Suevi besieged and took Augusta Emerita, the current Merida, which, if you remember, was founded during the Asturian Wars, which you can learn about by clicking on the link shown at the top of the screen. A year later, in 441, the Suevi entered the capital of Baetica Hispalis, now Seville. With the imperial troops gone, their influence spread across Martaginense. But from Ravenna, the emperor decided to curb the Suevi expansionism. He sent an army supported by the Visigoths of Theodoric I, but unfortunately for the empire, this army was defeated, so the Suevi were virtually without any kind of opposition on the other side of the border. In the year 448 after Christ, Requila, the Suevi king, died and was succeeded by Riciar, his son, who tried to strengthen the Suevi kingdom through an alliance with Theodoric's Visigoths. A marriage was agreed upon between a daughter of Theodoric and Riciar himself. The Visigoths, for their part, aiming to strengthen their Visigothic kingdom of Toulouse, also tried to form an alliance with the Vandals of Africa, marrying another daughter of Theodoric to the successor to the Vandal throne. However, here we witness a terrifying event. The husband took the girl and cut off her nose and ears and returned her to the Visigothic territory, with the intention, according to chroniclers of the time, of depriving her of her natural beauty. Obviously, this was a harsh affront to the Visigothic king, as a representative of his people and as the father of the mutilated woman. But the real terror came from the east. The Scourge of God, as some call it. The rider who leaves a trail of desolation in his wake, for where this man's horse trod, the grass would not grow again. A man who ruled his steppe riders with an iron fist, who had murdered his brother and taken total control of his people, the Huns. His name, Attila. The Eastern Roman Empire paid tributes to Attila's Huns so they would not invade their borders, which was humiliating for an empire that had conquered so many lands and brought so many enemies to their knees. On his part, Aetius, who remember was now a powerful man in the west, maintained a good relationship with the Huns with the intention of keeping them away from his borders. However, things would soon change. We are going to witness a high-caliber political game. Marciano, the Eastern Emperor, saw the Huns as a danger that at any moment would stop collecting tributes and prefer to plunder their lands. So in some way, he began to make Attila see that Gaul was a more desirable booty than Constantinople itself. In other words, he passed the buck to the Western Roman Empire. Valentinian III Western Emperor and his loyal Aetius tried to convince the Huns that Gaul was not that important, that it was better to stay where they were while they were having conversations with Theodoric I Rex of the Visigoths to guarantee his help if the Huns finally decided to invade the Western Empire. Obviously, Theodoric I knew that Attila's first target would be Ravenna, but if the Roman host fell, the Visigoths would be next, so Theodoric looked favorably on the alliance with the Roman Empire. From Carthage, the Rex Vandalorum et Alanorum Genseric tried to convince Attila to invade the west and thus eliminate the Visigoths, staunch enemies of the Vandals. Let's remember what happened between a son of Genseric and a daughter of Theodoric I. For his part, Attila had something to say. He also did not look favorably on the alliance between Visigoths and Romans, and he also intended to destroy the former. The fact is that all these political and diplomatic movements took place during the years 449 and 450 with the aim of avoiding a large-scale conflict. However, negotiations to avoid war failed, and Attila crossed the Rhine with his warriors to devastate various Gallo-Roman cities. Orleans, defended by Sangibanos Alans, decided to surrender without fighting. However, it seems that not all united forces were there, as the approach of the Visigothic army caused Attila to withdraw without fighting. Here, Attila consulted his soothsayers, and they told him that one of his great enemies would die in battle, but this would not mean the enemy's defeat. We will see if this prediction comes true or not. The forces of both sides began to gather, Ezio bringing all the possible soldiers from the empire until the great clash between both sides took place on June 20th, 451 AD. A clash that would be remembered for all eternity. The Battle of the Catalaunian fields took place. Let's analyze the armies of each side. On one hand, we have the Roman army. Roman because it was under the direct orders of the emperor, and Sidonius, a chronicler of the time, calls it a force of auxiliaries without legionaries. However, the troops that Aetius had brought from Italy were made up of the elite. They were Palatine auxiliaries and had superior training to the old legions of the Republic. The Romans took the left flank, aided by Frankish, Sarmatian, Burgundian, and Saxon auxiliaries. In the center, we have the Alan troops led by King Sangiban, who remember is the one who had surrendered Orleans without fighting, so Aetius doubted that these men would hold their positions throughout the battle. His intention was for Attila to think the same and charge his own men to the center. Aetius' intention would be to perform a pincer move. We'll see if he succeeds. On the right flank, we finally have the Visigoths, led by Theodoric I, accompanied by his successor, Torismond. On his part, Attila also had a very diverse army. In the center, he placed his precious ones. He positioned the Gepids on the right flank to face the Romans, while he positioned the Ostrogoths against the Visigoths. It's curious how two peoples, Ostrogoths and Visigoths, who had invaded together the empire and had fought together under the command of Alaric, now they would face each other in battle. In total, we have about 40,000 men on the imperial side, and about 50,000 on Attila's side. And ladies and gentlemen, it began. To the preliminaries of the battle, the Visigothic troops took over a small hill that was on their flank, which would give them a slight advantage in the fight. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Attila ordered the charge of his entire army, and the Gepids, Ostrogoths, charged against their respective enemies. He attacked at this hour with the idea that if the battle did not tilt in his favor, he could retreat under the cover of night. The Romans, led by Aetius on the left flank, maintained a defensive position at all times, facing the Gepids but without taking risks, with the intention of not losing men stupidly. The Gepids initially threw themselves like beasts, but soon they also began to fight more cautiously. So the casualties on that flank were few. And all because the battle would be decided in the center and on the other flank. Aetius' idea was that the Visigoths and Alans would bear the brunt of the battle, so that if they won the fight, they would be sufficiently weakened so as not to be able to rebel against the empire. The Ostrogoths struck the Visigoths with fury, and they received this in a shield wall formation. It should be noted that all the Visigoths were dismounted, so they would not be an easy target for the Hun archers. The Visigoths were resisting Ostrogoth onslaught after onslaught, and they were doing very well, causing many casualties to the Ostrogoths. But it is true that the men of Theodoric I were also losing men. The thing is, the center was holding, but the center was not. The Alan warriors were resisting the charges of the Hun riders, who were supported by their mounted archers. However, the Alans, who had started with not very high morale, were slowly retreating little by little. But with each passing hour, the center of the imperial forces was moving away from the axis of the battle. There came a point where the Huns were able to attack the Visigoths on the flank, and this is when Theodoric I mounted his steed and rallied his warriors to fight. Surinia pivoted slightly to face the new threat, but an arrow hit him in the chest, instantly killing him. For a moment, both sides held their breath. Attila and the Ostrogoths, as well as Aetius himself, expected the Visigoths to beat a retreat, but nothing could be further from the truth. And a great display of initiative and sense of duty, Turismund, successor to Theodoric I, proclaimed himself Rex of the Visigoths immediately and asked his new subjects to avenge his father and destroy the enemies of his people. And then the Visigoths, with renewed energy, switched from defense to offense and charged against the Ostrogoths and the Huns, disrupting their formations and penetrating their lines. Faced with this new momentum, the Ostrogoths lost their eagerness to fight and turned around, fleeing the battlefield. Observing what was happening, Aetius ordered his palatines to charge against the Gepids, who barely had the will to fight for a cause that seemed, at that moment, doomed to failure. The Romans fought against the Barbarian front until they put them to flight, allowing Aetius to pivot his men and face the center of the battlefield. The Visigoths did the same. Wait a moment, do you know in which famous battle, also key for Rome, this strategy took place? A center that retreats and flanks that advance an envelope? Leave me in the comments that I'm always reading you, and remember that you can join the channel's Discord, to be able to keep up with everything that happens in the Hispanic Guard. Well, let's continue. Attila, seeing that he was about to be surrounded, ordered the retreat to his camp, which was nothing more than a circle of wagons, nothing to do with the Roman marching camps that the Roman legions built years ago, which, by the way, if you don't know what these camps were like, you can do it by clicking on the link that is shown at the top of the screen. We might think that Attila was finished and that the imperial forces would surround his positions and crush him. Well, no. It's true that the imperial forces decided to surround the Huns and starve them out, but they let the hours pass, giving Ezio time to make political moves. Meanwhile, the Visigoths took advantage of the moment of peace to search for the body of their former king, Theodoric, as in the heat of battle they had not had time to recover his body. Turismund wanted revenge and tried to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the Huns, but Aetius convinced the new Visigothic Rex to withdraw, arguing that his brothers might be plotting to take the Visigothic throne while Turismund was away from home. The Visigoths finally decided to return to Toulouse, but what Aetius actually didn't want was for the Visigoths to gain too much power as to betray Attila, rise against Rome. After all, Aetius knew that there had to be a balance among the barbarian peoples so that none would directly confront the empire. That's why Aetius also withdrew, allowing Attila to save his life, albeit with a greatly diminished army. The imperial forces had lost nearly 10,000 men, while Attila's troops more than 15,000. The following year, in 452 AD, Attila attacked northern Italy, spreading terror in cities like Milan and Pavia. His ultimate goal was to take the city of Rome, but his men began to suffer the same hardships as Alaric's hosts years ago. The troops from the steppes began to starve, and to make matters worse, the Eastern Empire sent reinforcements to help Valentinian defeat the Scourge of God. Attila gave up his attempt to take Rome, and began to wander through northern Italy. He tried to enter the territory of the Visigoths, but Theudemir managed to defeat them, so the Huns had to withdraw from their borders. In the year 453 after Christ, Attila got married, which we could say is not of great importance, as he already had more wives. What happened is that at the banquet, the king ate and drank in large quantities. And while he slept that night, Attila, the Scourge of God, died from a nosebleed. Finally, the man who had forced both empires to work together, the man who seemed like he was going to destroy Rome, had died in his bed. Do you remember the prediction they gave to Attila? Well, it came true. A great rival died on the battlefield. This is Theodoric I, but this did not make the Visigoths disappear. In fact, the Visigoths were more powerful than ever. Turismund, taking advantage of the situation, sacked Arles, but he could not enjoy his reign for long, as the same year that Attila died, the Visigothic king was executed by his brothers Theodoric and Frederick, with the former becoming the new king of the Goths. Year 453 after Christ, 23 years until the end of the Western Empire. TikTok. Theodoric II had been educated according to Roman customs, so his foreign policy would be pro-Roman. That is, he would try to bring Visigoths and Romans closer together. The opportunity to demonstrate his inclinations came shortly after, as in the year 454 after Christ, Valentinian III witnessed a Bagaudae revolt. Yes, it's the first time one mentioned them. The Bagaudae. One thinks it's interesting to analyze them separately, so one will make a specific video about the Bagaudae. When it's published, I'll put the link up here. Well, and remember that if you haven't seen the previous chapter, the confrontation between Aetius and Theodoric against Attila in the Catalaunian fields, you can do it quickly by clicking on the link that is shown at the top of the screen. Let's proceed. The Western Roman Emperor was overwhelmed by the revolt without soldiers to send, so he asked the Visigoths to honor the alliance and go to Hispania to quell the revolt. No sooner said than done. Theodoric II put at the head of the army Frederick, his brother and co-conspirator to murder the previous Visigothic king, and sent him with a significant host to the peninsula to face the rebels. Just as they had done years ago under the orders of Gallia, the Visigoths would now fight in Hispania defending Roman interests. The link to that chapter is at the top of the screen. Not much is known about Frederico's campaign, but it is known that the Visigoths could not resist the Visigothic attack given the military superiority that the Visigoths had over the rebels. The fact is that the victory was total. That same year, towards the end of the campaign season, in the month of September, Aetius was murdered by his emperor, Valentinian III. The same thing has happened that occurred with Stilicho and Emperor Honorius. The general was too good a strategist and too popular, which could put the emperor in a bind if the general aspired to the throne. However, this remedy did not work for Valentinian III. For a few months later, in March of the year 455 after Christ, he was murdered by two soldiers loyal to Aetius while reviewing the army. But there is a problem with all this, and it is that the emperor died without offspring. Again, the Western Empire was approaching the abyss of power struggle. The immediate successor to the throne was Petronius Maximus. It is said that the soldiers had been bribed by Maximus to carry out the regicide, but it is not clear. What is certain is that Maximus bribed a large number of people to support him in his race to the throne. However, the Eastern Emperor did not recognize Maximus as emperor. Genseric, king of the Vandals, whose kingdom, remember, is now in North Africa, took the opportunity to take advantage. He said that his peace treaty was with Valentinian, not with Rome, so when the emperor died, he could attack the empire without breaking any pact. He landed in Italy and headed for Rome, where Maximus was located. He quickly understood that he did not have enough men to stop the Vandals, so he decided that he and the entire court would withdraw. However, things went awry. Panic spread in the Eternal City, and while the emperor tried to escape, he was murdered by Susupit, mutilated and thrown into the river, so his reign ended soon. The successor was Abito, who had excellent relations with the Visigoths. But before one go with Abito, should be said that the Vandals managed to take and loot the city of Rome, although they abandoned it shortly after Theodoric I supported the new emperor, who was initially crowned in Toulouse, capital of the Visigothic domains. Finally, the Visigothic people had managed to get someone very inclined to their interest to occupy the true throne of the empire. Like the Vandals, the Suevi intended to take advantage of the political instability of the empire, and their king, Requilario, did not hesitate. In the year 456 after Christ, Requilario invaded Tarraconense, which had always remained a province loyal to the empire. Habito was also unable to send an army to Hispania to defend his province, so he asked Theodoric II to defeat the Suevi. Theodoric began to gather his hosts, but in the meantime tried to exhaust the diplomatic route with the Suevi. But this did not work. In fact, Requiar even dared to challenge Theodoric to battle. The Visigoths crossed the Pyrenees, and in October of the year 456 after Christ, the Battle of the Orbigo River took place. 12 miles from Astorga, and the victory was total for the Visigoths. Many Suevi lost their lives in the encounter, and a good part was made prisoner. Regulario escaped with loyal followers into Galaecia's interior. Theodoric exploited the Suevi's defeat to seize their territory. The Visigoths took Braga, the capital of the Suevi kingdom, and it was looted by the victorious troops. Regulario attempted to escape but was captured in Porto and delivered to Theodoric. Finally, the Suevi king was executed. But despite the fact that Theodoric could now have taken over the Suevi kingdom and destroyed it, he decided to oppose a puppet king loyal to the Visigoths, Agriulfo, who was not a Goth. Some Suevi did not accept the new king and declared themselves rebels, so the Visigothic military campaigns continued. Theodoric took Emerita Augusta with the idea that Agriulfo would have an easier reign, but this lasted only a few months as Agriulfo soon turned against the Visigoths. And that's because he began to rule independently and tyrannically, which forced the Visigoths to take matters into their own hands. But then news came from Italy. Avitus had been deposed from the throne and replaced in the year 457 after Christ by Majorian, who was not favorable to the Visigoths. Theodoric did not recognize the new emperor and decided to return to Gaul for whatever might happen, but he left an army in Spain to fight his until recently protected Agriulfo, king of the Suevi. The Visigoths took various important cities such as Astorga and Parencia, which were looted after the conquest. They defeated and executed Agriulfo. The Suevi kingdom collapsed under political pressure. It split into two kingdoms, the north and the south, with kings Framtano and Madras respectively. Support for Framtano was scarce, so he was murdered in the middle of 458 AD, having reigned less than a year. Madras decided to plunder Lusitania and then plundered the Suevi kingdom of the north, let's say as revenge for having initially supported Framtano. But after the death of Framtano, another sector of the Suevi chose a certain Remismundo as king, who was a bit on his own, plundering territories that were not loyal to him. Initially he was the king of the northern kingdom, but the history of this monarch is a bit blurry. For his part, Maldras began to murder his own relatives for fear that they would usurp his throne. The Visigoths, for their part, launched another campaign and took Hispalis, as Theodoric no longer feared a Roman attack on his territories in Gaul, given how weakened the empire was. The intention was to corner the Suevi in Lusitania and Gaetia, eliminating any Suevi trace in Baetica. The following year, in 459 AD, Theodoric II recognized the legitimacy of Emperor Majorian, and both sent a joint army to Lusitanian territory, where they took Santarem. The idea was the same as previously with Baetica, to continue cornering the Suevi in a corner of the peninsula to prevent their looting and pillaging in Roman territory. Somehow, the Suevi, Romans and Visigoths reached a weak peace agreement, which allowed Majorian to invade Africa. However, the invasion went terribly wrong as the Vandals of Genseric claimed victory. Majorian's problem was not being defeated per se, as anyone can be. His problem was being defeated at that particular moment in history with the incredible political instability that prevailed in Ravenna. In fact, upon his return to Italy, Majorian was murdered and succeeded by Libius Severus. In the year 460 after Christ, Maldras was also murdered by his people, in this case the Suebi, and was succeeded by Frumar, who immediately entered into conflict with Remismund for total control of the Suebi people. 2 years later, the Visigoths received the city of Narbonne as a gift, thus gaining direct access to the Mediterranean Sea. Again, 2 years later, in 464 after Christ, the Visigoths decided to support Remismund in his ambition to rule over all the Suebi. Theodoric II sent a Visigothic army to Hispania, along with Remismund's loyalists, and they managed to defeat Sumario, unifying the two Suebi kingdoms into one again. It should be noted that Remismund got along great with Theodoric, so it didn't seem like what happened with Agriulfo years ago would occur. But Theodoric could not enjoy the new peace, because in the year 465 after Christ he was murdered by one of his brothers, Euric, who ascended to the Visigothic throne. Under this king, the Visigothic kingdom gained independence from the Roman Empire. Year 465 after Christ. 11 years until the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Year 465 before Christ. The Visigothic king, Theodoric II, has just been murdered by his brother, Euric, and the latter has assumed the throne and the mission to lead his people to victory. We will see that the new king was very skilled in the art of diplomacy. Do you remember who was on the imperial throne? Livius Severus. But let's say that nobody wanted him, and he could only really reign in the Italian peninsula. In fact, he died from natural causes, although there is also the theory that he was poisoned by Ricimer, a very powerful man. Here begins a period of instability in which there were negotiations between the regions and the Eastern Emperor, Leon I, to choose the Western Emperor. This interregnum lasted until April of the year 467, when Leon I appointed the general Anthemius as emperor. The new emperor presented himself in Wantali with a large army supported by the Eastern legions, and after gaining the support of Ricimer, whom one mentioned earlier, this unstable period was ended. The Western Roman Empire was once again led with an iron fist and would fight to recover its lost territories. Indeed, it was time to reconquer the imperial granary, located in North Africa, where Genseric and his Vandal kingdom were located. It was essential to destroy the Vandal kingdom to achieve some peace in the Mediterranean, so that trade could flow again and food would not be a problem in Italy. The Eastern and Western Empire organized a large army led by Basiliscus, brother-in-law of Leo I, and in the year 468 they landed in the Vandal kingdom. There were various skirmishes that resulted in Roman victories, but Genseric knew how to play his cards very well. When the Roman fleet was in front of Carthage, he attacked it with flaming ships, which decimated the Roman navy and returned control of the waters to the Vandals. Upon learning of this, the Eastern Empire signed peace with the Vandals and withdrew from the war, leaving Anthemius alone against the Vandals. Of course, without ships, there was no way to supply the army and to guarantee a minimal chance of carrying out a successful campaign in Africa. Dejected, Anthemius had to sign peace with Genseric and return to Italy. Euric, for his part, did not hesitate to take advantage of this Roman setback and decided to launch an expansion campaign in Gaul. His goal, that everything between the Loire and the Mediterranean would be Visigothic. These expansionist cravings led him to confront Priothamus, a Breton leader allied with the Romans. In the summer of the year 469, the confrontation between Rhyothemus and Euric took place, where the Visigoths emerged victorious after causing a large number of casualties to the enemy. I want to emphasize that one thing is to win battles and conquer cities, and quite another is to manage to govern a territory and its population. Euric had no problem, as the Gallo-Roman aristocracy had long since distanced itself from Ravenna, as they did not want to return to a centralized government, but wanted to maintain a certain degree of independence. This, coupled with the fact that the Roman Empire was heading towards the abyss, tipped the balance in favor of the Visigoths. But the Suevi also wanted to take advantage of this weakness, and decided to launch expansionist campaigns from the territories in the west of Hispania. They took Lisbon and continued advancing to the south and east with the intention of annexing new territories. However, Eurico was already preparing for a post-Roman scenario, that is, for the moment when Rome finally disappeared. He decided that the Suevi should remain confined in Galicia, and for this, he ordered the troops stationed in Hispania to halt the Suevi advance. He achieved his objectives, and in the year 470 after Christ, he established a militarized border, that is, with fortified posts and groups of armed troops protecting the limits of both kingdoms. All of this was done without the permission of the Western Roman Emperor, even though theoretically, Hispania was still Roman. The thing is that officially it was so, but in practice it was the Visigoths who did and undid at their whim throughout the peninsula. one resists putting Hispania as Visigothic for now, until, as we will see soon, the aristocracy supports Eurico. Are you enjoying the video? If so, remember that you can subscribe to the channel to support this project and not miss any video. And by the way, want to remind you that you can become a senator of the Hispanic Guard by becoming a patron of the channel through the Patreon page, whose link you will find in the video description. Myself and the entire Guard thank you. Let's now return to Gaul. Anthemius was not at all pleased that the Visigoths had expanded so much into Roman territory, so in the year 471 he sent an army, led by his son Anthemius, to expel the barbarians from the vicinity of Arles and stop them at the Rhone. But things did not go well at all, and the Romans suffered a resounding defeat. In fact, in the year 472, the Visigoths established their southern border beyond the Rhone, taking the cities of Arles and Marseille. That same year, Anthemius died due to, once again, an uprising by Ricimer. However, this would be the last, as Ricimer died shortly after. Olybrius ascended to the throne, who barely reigned as he also died that same year. A new emperor, Glycerius, would try to straighten the course of the empire, but none of that mattered to Euric anymore. The Visigoths launched a campaign in Hispania to ensure on one hand control of the major cities and all military enclaves, and on the other to curry favor with the aristocracy in order to govern them in the future. He sent an army to take Caesar Augusta and Pompaelo, while the other army would take Tarraco and the Mediterranean coast of Tarraconensis. To win over the people, the Visigoths incorporated Vicencio, Dux Hispaniarum, that is, the military representative of Ravenna in Hispania, into their ranks. Thanks to this campaign, the Visigoths now indeed had total control of the entire peninsula, with the exception of the Suevi, who they had confined in the area of what is now Galicia. Well, and of the Cantabrians and Basques located in the north. In the year 474, the Roman Emperor Glycerius again lost the throne, this time in favor of Julius Nepos, someone who tried to ingratiate himself with the Visigoths so that they would set aside their expansionist desires and give him time to rebuild his forces. The fact is that Julius Nepos and Euric had very good relations, with the emperor even recognizing the territories conquered by the Visigoths. But unfortunately for both, these good relations did not last long. And it's because the general,
Roman Orestes,
gathered his loyal followers and left Rome in command of an army heading to Ravenna, with the intention of deposing the emperor. Julius Nepos, upon learning of the maneuver, abandoned the city and fled to Dalmatia, leaving the throne vacant. Orestes, instead of taking the throne for himself, placed his son Romulus Augustus on the throne on October 31st of the year 475 at only 14 years of age. Being so young and holding the reins of such a badly wounded empire, he was called Romulus Augustulus, which means something like Romulus the Little Augustus. However, there is a problem, and that is that for Leon I Emperor of the East, the true emperor was still Julius Nepos, so he would not help Romulus if something happened to him. And indeed, that's how it was. Just 10 months after Romulus was named emperor by his father, on August 23rd of the year 476 after Christ, Odoacer, at the head of various Germanic tribes, took Italy and put it to the emperor. The Western Roman Empire, founded in the year 753 before Christ as a small monarchy that had gradually expanded, that had become a republic, that had faced terrifying enemies, that had become an empire, that had bled from civil wars, that had expanded its borders to unimaginable limits for the time, had come to an end. Orestes was executed. And Romulus, well, Romulus has some legend behind him. One expected no less, as he is the last emperor of Rome. One theory, which is the most substantiated and probably the correct one, says that Romulus was sent to a large fortress in Campania, near Naples. There he would live on a small pension and lead a normal life until the end of his days. The map of Europe would look as shown on screen, more or less. If you notice, north of the Visigoths there is a kingdom called the Kingdom of Soissons. This kingdom can be seen as the last bastion of the Western Roman Empire. This kingdom appeared when Aegidius, the Magister Militum of the Gallic provinces, refused to accept the authority of Libius Severus, who, remember, had ended the reign of Emperor Majorian. Now let's return to the Visigoths. The citizens who were in the Visigothic domains gradually accepted the new reality that Rome had disappeared and Euric was the new lord. Interestingly, the integration between Romans and Visigoths was quite good. Euric included Romans with administrative capacity in his court, which made the people see that the Visigothic intention was not to subjugate them, but for both peoples to coexist and work together. Euric's Visigothic court gradually grew, gaining importance and establishing the foundations of the future medieval courts that the Visigothic kingdom would have. Toulouse was a hotbed, receiving ambassadors from various peoples with a trade that was progressively increasing and a prosperity that was returning to its streets. But Euric wouldn't live much longer. In the year 484, the Visigothic king died of natural causes after 19 years on the throne of his people. The successor to the Visigothic throne was Euric's son, Alaric II, being the first Visigoth to inherit such a vast kingdom. Finally, Alaric's dream of achieving an independent kingdom for his people has been fulfilled. But all good things must end. The Visigothic kingdom of Toulouse, led by Alaric II, would be brutally attacked by a people who coveted their lands, the Franks,